We should be live.
Okay, we should be live. All right.
Ooh.
Good morning, Darren. Good
Yeah,
morning,
good
Grant.
morning.
Morning.
Grant, you're in Ohio, right? Isn't that?
Yes, it's technically afternoon for me.
I
It's
was going to say,
12:01.
I apologize for the good morning. Hopefully, good afternoon.
Yeah, Ohio's in the weird where it's like you really shouldn't be East Coast. It's
Yeah,
like,
it feels like you should have the Central Time Zone instead of East Coast.
yeah, I'm sorry, you're in the wrong time
Could you
zone.
fix that? Could you work on it? All right, so today should be fun. We are welcome to our latest GPTScript community meetup. Today we're going to be talking about our recently released 0.4 release of GPTScript.
0.42, which means we already managed to fix 2 bugs before we
0.2. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We're joined today by Grant Linville, who is one of our lead engineers here at Acorn and led the development of the project we're going to be talking about today, which is our OpenAPI Endpoints. And this is a really awesome feature. It's basically allows you to take the tools functionality at the heart of GPTScript and easily add any type of API endpoint that supports the OpenAPI standard to it. And Grant's going to go through and talk to us a little bit about the different approaches that you can take to integrate these things. And really, the whole idea here is using the LLMs to power outputs that are more interesting than just pushing text, right? So we're gonna talk about that in some depth. Maybe just at a high level, Grant, you want to start us off and kind of walk through the development of this project? Then we'll dive into your screen.
Sure. Yeah. So I've already created a lot of like API wrappers around various services out there like Slack so that you can interact with them with GPTScript. And that kind of led to some thinking of how can we just make that a lot easier so that people don't have to write custom code to sort of serve as a layer between the LLM and the API. So now with this new OpenAPI thing, all you have to do is give it the definition, and GPTScript will internally basically generate tool definitions for each operation described in the OpenAPI definition. And then when the LLM calls that tool, the GPTScript like CLI itself will just formulate and do the HTTP request and then just return the results right back to the LLM for further processing. So let's go ahead and
just like jump into it. Can you?
It was really cool.
Talk about just like the OpenAPI standard is relatively new. Maybe just explain what it is, and in the sense of we had for a long time it was called, what was it called? It was called
Swagger. So it used to be Swagger, and then it became like a standard, and then that became OpenAPI v2. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I think v2 was when they kind of renamed it, and now v3 is the current one. But a lot of services are in v2. But it's been around because Swagger. Because I remember like at the beginning when it started or whatever. I don't know. So it's been a decade or so that this stuff has been around, but it just keeps growing and growing. I'm pretty negative about it on Twitter. I always complain about it, but now that we've integrated it into GPTScript and it works so well, now it's the best thing ever. So it's
all the criticism was misplaced, is what you're saying?
Yeah, of course. So that's the way it always is. As soon as I figure out how to use the technology, I love it. But I wanted to say it was really cool when we started designing this, because it was as Grant was saying, it was we wrote all these custom wrappers to APIs, and it was okay, well, people have open API definitions for their services or whatever, and how do we make it just point to that? And as we started designing it, it's well, where could we hook it in? We figured out it was it's so elegantly, perfectly fit into the design of GPTScript, where it's instead of basically referencing a tool, you just reference a service in OpenAPI. It's really cool. So Grant will show it. I was super excited at how simple the integration is. It's just very natural. It's pretty cool.
So if you think about this at the highest level, though, the idea is the wrapping of APIs that we were doing 3 weeks ago or 5 weeks ago. If an API supports this OpenAPI approach, you really don't have to wrap it at all. You simply point it at the definition of the API. The LLM learns it, returns a tool effectively, and we start using that tool.
Yeah, and so we're fooling around. So it's like now we can just directly hit these services. Like there's probably a use case where you're going to wrap some of these services in another tool, but it would just purely be like natural language driven because there's some practical things of like you don't necessarily want to expose all APIs of a service to the LLM because there's like read and write and whatnot. So and then it's technically cheaper or more efficient if you give it a couple of the APIs, not all of them. And you can do that with GPTScript. It's really cool. So I don't know, granted, at some point, if you can demo the list tools.
Oh, yeah.
But anyways, so I don't want to throw you.
He's actually got a planned demo. It's nothing like your demos, Darren. I think we
should. Yeah, I know. He's
probably like rehearsed it a little bit and thought about it before showing up. I wouldn't want to send him down the wrong direction. So
and I wanted to say, like, if people follow me on Twitter or whatever, it's like I've posted a bunch of Grant's videos. He records these videos on Loom, and so it's like when like some earlier version of this was Spotify. I think. Oh, yeah, I think you might show Spotify today.
We're doing Spotify again today. Yeah.
Yeah, but like he's done a bunch of, so it's like a lot of the videos that I post that like people like retweet or whatever are from Grant. So Grant's been doing a lot of cool features. Anyways, I'll let you go, Grant.
Cool. All right, so let's dive in. So this is a really simple example OpenAPI document. You can find this one in like their official repos. It's for a pet store API. So each one is going to have operations, which is a path, and then an HTTP method on that path. And basically what we're doing is for each operation defined here, so get on/pets, get on/pets/pet ID, and then I skipped over it, but post on/pets. We're generating a tool internally that will just execute that HTTP request. One thing that's really handy about it too, this is maybe needless internal information, but this schema we can basically just hand to OpenAI and it understands it because it's in the same like JSON schema format that they designed their API in, which is part of how it all just fits together so nicely. So this is a simple example, just listing pets, creating new pets, and then getting a pet by a specific ID. And then if I pull up my terminal here, I have a little Flask app running that just serves up that API so we can run requests against it. One thing that I can go ahead and show that Darren mentioned is we have GPTScript list tools, normally just lists all the built-ins, but you can also give it the path to an OpenAPI file and it will list the tools from there. So you can kind of see what it's generating. The default sort of entry point tool, if you want to call it that, is just one that exports all the other tools in the file. But you also have a specific tool for each operation that was in the definition. We try to generate a description for each argument if there is one. Sometimes for like request bodies, there isn't. But the LLM GPT-4 is usually pretty good at figuring out what it needs to do. So the first one I'll run here is fairly simple. We'll do list.gpt to list out all the pets. And there's only going to be 2. It's just using an in-memory array. There's no actual database backing this. But it got that list from this server. So if we look back at the logs here, you can see the HTTP request that was made. So that request was just made from the GPTScript CLI and it knowing what to do based on the OpenAPI definition. So you can ask it to do slightly more complicated things like list all the pets, then create a new one, and then list all the pets again. So let's do that. There we go. So it kind of just makes up an ID because it doesn't really have the context to know what to do. I've never seen it choose 4 before. That was interesting. But anyway, it did know from like listing the pets that the tag was probably the place to put what kind of pet it was. So it's able to, reason a little bit and figure that out. So it tells us originally there were 2. Now, after it added a new one, there are 3. So fairly straightforward. Lastly, just to demonstrate the last... Sorry, I'm bad at typing and talking at the same time. To demonstrate the 500. I've never seen that 500 before. Of course, it happens live. Anyway, the last operation that it hasn't used yet from the OpenAPI definition was get pet by ID. There we go. Yeah, don't know what caused the 500 because that's like literally the exact same request, but There we go. So the ID2 is mittens, which was the second.
So ironically, it looks like the LLM like did the right thing, but maybe the code. It's interesting because it says pet ID 2, and the other one was pet ID. Huh.
What's weird too is the server says it responded with a 200, or was that 500 from? Oh, this was coming back from OpenAI. I see.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll find that OpenAI is actually not super reliable, but like, I guess good enough.
Yep. So anyway, the pet store is just a very simple example of working with OpenAPI. And later today, I'll likely be putting up on Render just a service that's basically serving that API so that people can have a very easy example to just demo against and try out this feature. Because most publicly served APIs that have an OpenAPI definition require some sort of authentication, which just makes it a lot more annoying to interact with and to use as an example. And speaking of annoying...
Did you write this pet store thing, or you found it already?
No, yeah. So this definition I found from like one of Swagger's GitHub repos. I just edited it to point to a local server.
For the Python code, where did you...
Oh, the Python code, I just handed this to ChatGPT and then it generated it for me.
Yeah. So it's like, so the cool thing is like definitely if you're like Python and I've definitely seen it from the Python world, and I'm sure Node is very similar, is like, it's most of these frameworks these days generate these schemas for you, or they're either, if you have the schema first, generates the code. And it's like, so the thing that's super cool is like, it's like, this is a pretty efficient way of plugging in your own services, so it's like, instead of trying to write like, because it's like, I want to plug in a service to, like, I want to plug in some actual code into GPTScript or whatever. It's like, so instead of like writing a GPTScript specific thing, it's like, well, you could just program it up real quick in Python and run a little service for yourself, and then just plug it with just give it the OpenAPI schema. So it's like, it ends up, because it's pretty easy to create these services, that it's like, this is a decent like integration mechanism too. So you don't really have to write any you don't have to write any, like what Grant was saying before, is like bindings to existing APIs. It's like, you can do it in more, I don't know, it's just a different approach.
There was a question that just came in, guys. It was from Jingyan, and he asked if you have to use, or not you have to, do you use natural language to call OpenAPI via this GPT script? So just clarifying, I think the actual GPT script that you're sending the requests, if you go back to your second example, list all the pets, that's natural language. So we're just saying in here, we've given it the tool pet store. That pet store, doesn't require any kind of token. So all I'm giving it is that, and then sending it whatever. You could change that, right? And list some of the pets, or change it however you wanted to express your thoughts. It's not code. It's just natural language. You're calling against that API, and then you're getting a natural language response back in the
Yeah, one of the things that might be like slightly, it's like in this demo that Grant's doing, is like he has a little Python service running just so, because it's an example of a service. Like if it was a public thing like Google Maps, or I think you're going to show that or something, it's like there's no code to write. It's purely natural language. You just point it to the schema, and then you do whatever. So
I mean, that's a great example of what Grant just did. He just made up a brand new one, whatever. Just like I would be talking to ChatGPT, right? I'm just sending a request, and it's translating the API into a set of commands, and then executing those commands against it. So now we've got goldfish and bettafish and clownfish and pufferfish and catfish.
Yeah.
So that's it. Once you have this in place, you can engage with it however you want through this. All right, so this is a cool example, but more realistically, some API endpoints that, what are some services that you've kind of tried this out against? I see you have Spotify and Google Maps up there. Do you want to talk about integrating with more complex APIs, much bigger, longer, and rich APIs?
Yes, yeah, they definitely become a little bit more difficult. So Spotify, their OpenAPI definition that they distribute actually has, at least last I checked, which was like a week ago, an error in it that goes against the whole OpenAPI schema and is technically invalid. So I had to save my own copy of it and cut out that operation. And this in general is just a slightly more like trimmed down version of the Spotify API. I think I took out a lot of things related to like podcasts and audiobooks or something to mainly just focus it on music. And then they also only do OAuth for authorization, which we don't have implemented in GPTScript. So I kind of have to go through a lot of like other stuff just in order to get the token to be able to present to it. So anyway, that's kind of the difficulty with working with bigger, real APIs. But once you get through that kind of thing, then it works really well. So I've got a few different Spotify examples here. If I do this, I have my Spotify right over here. So here, let me make this readable again, though. There we go. So this one is find the top 10 songs from Metallica and add them to my library, then add the album that each song came from to my library. So let's do that. Let's see, hide that. So we'll kind of just see things happen here as it does all this, but you can watch the different tool calls it makes. There's a whole lot of tools in here since this is a pretty long OpenAPI definition. But because OpenAPI definitions are usually pretty well documented with descriptions and descriptive names and all of that, usually very little explanation is required in order to get the LLM to do what you want. So you can already see it added 10 Metallica songs to my library here, and then the album for each one of them. So you can just tell it to do things like that. I have some other examples like this one. What can you tell me about the band Megadeth and what's their most popular album? I've seen this one fail once before, so I'm kind of curious to see if it gets it this time. Spotify has like a little bit of information about bands, but not as much as like a Wikipedia page would.
It's interesting that it searched twice. Oh, because it was type album, then type
and
artist.
then type artist.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Since that's an array, though, I wonder if it could have done both in one call, but didn't. I'm not sure. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it got this right this time. And what's cool too is like, and this is just GPT-4 just kind of being helpful. I didn't ask it to do this, but it gives me links to their stuff on Spotify, which is pretty neat. So the last one I had here is recommendations. And I believe there's like a built-in similar artists. Yeah, get an artist-related artists. And this is interesting too. I've seen it do this before, where it somehow already knows the artist ID, and I'm not sure how that's possible. But like, it's gonna get this right. It's listing out a whole bunch of metal bands now.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
because like that means it must have been trained on data that already had that ID. Maybe because it's on web pages and it's linked to it or something.
Yeah, it must be somewhere in the models, just kind of inherent.
Well, yeah, I guess. Well, you're also, because what you do, like, was that for Iron? I mean, you're doing really popular bands.
Yeah, like this is a really well-known band. Yeah, nothing
obscure. Like something obscure or whatever.
Yep. So that's just a couple examples of how you can interact with Spotify. There's a whole lot of other tools in here. Let me type this into less so that we're actually at the top of the file. So yeah, there's. And this, again, is really only a subset of all the different things that you can do in their API. But you can ask it about playlists, specific songs, lots of details about albums, and yeah.
So let's say you want to ask it to find popular playlists that have Taylor Swift music in them. Is it going to be? Can you send something as arbitrary as that, or do you need to put any syntax in this? Do I need to give it any specific stuff?
Let's see.
This is kind of like the fun thing with AIs. It's like, well, I don't know. We'll see if it'll do it.
Looks like it, yeah.
Not a small number of Taylor Swift songs.
Yeah.
Let's click on one of these here. Open.
This is Taylor Swift.
What's nice about this is like you could probably have asked that same question to directly to ChatGPT, and it might have actually given you these same answers, but it probably would have hallucinated the actual links or at least three.
Do you have ChatGPT?
Should I try it? Oh, do you want to do it to ChatGPT, or should I just do it like
let's
within
try it.
GPTScript?
No. Actually, just ask ChatGPT. I'm curious because
Okay, sure.
because they have like, ChatGPT is not just, it's a full app built on top of AI. So it's like they have other things, searching the web. Kind of curious.
Make sure you mention on Spotify. Yeah.
I think they'll do like.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of this is pretty much the same, I think.
Wow.
Yeah,
I wonder how that. No, but like it had to have hallucinated that. I mean, it's like it just knew it because like
it's been
it
trained
never searched the web. Try. You got to try something that's like, name some artist who's not very as popular.
I don't know. Try Megadeth.
Well, Megadeth is just as popular.
Are they though? Are they
not as popular as Taylor Swift?
That is true.
I mean, why wouldn't they? I mean, of course it's trained on Spotify though, right?
Yeah. Well, no, but there's a lot of content that links to Spotify. So I doubt they actually can train against Spotify data itself unless they have an actual agreement with them. But like there's a lot of web content that links to it. So I don't know.
Cool. So this is great though, because what you can do now is like, I can actually, with these, I can, instead of just finding them, I can actually add these things to my playlist, right? I can add like now, I won't make Grant add all the Taylor Swift stuff to his Spotify playlist.
Oh, I made an account just to play with this.
Oh,
so
okay.
You can
did
use
you?
the library as much as you want.
I don't want to interrupt your Megadeth listening. So with the
are there APIs to like play music on device?
There are. I think I removed those from my local definition here. But yeah, you could probably get it to like pause your song and then start playing it again and do weird stuff like that.
Now, if I wanted to, I could make the same OpenAPI endpoints. I can also add to, OpenAI functions, correct? Grant, like OpenAI supports function calling and could call functions. I assume they also support OpenAPI endpoints as well.
Do you mean like in the ChatGPT UI?
No, I mean like in the Playground UI when you're building assistants or building agents or you doing function calling. Yeah. I assume I could connect to OpenAPI endpoints as well. So where would I use this versus just building this stuff directly into like an OpenAI agent, for example?
Yeah, this is helpful because you can just easily chain it together with other things that you have in GPTScript. You can more easily take the outputs of one of these tools, for example, and then process them with a shell script. You just get the easier integration compared to just having a standalone assistant that you can just ask questions with. It's just kind of a different user experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other fundamental thing too is just that like this is only gonna, if you put it on ChatGPT, your service has to be public on the internet. Whereas if you're doing this, then you can access any service that might be like private, so you're on your company, intranet, if any of the kids say that these days.
And obviously this will connect to, to other models. It can be run locally. You could tie together all sorts of system prompts and things like that together. So, the concept of this is integrating tools, right? At the end of the day, that's what GPTScript is all about. Lots of different tools connecting to do all sorts of different things. And having this kind of tool in the tool belt is probably, probably next to things like RAG, connecting to databases, and next to things like, powering your local machine. It's probably going to be the most popular type of tool. Right?
Yeah. So like
API endpoint wrappers, and having the fact that you can build them now so easily is really exciting. But you said like the Spotify one was actually not a trivial thing. It was not simply, here's my API key and point to Spotify and figure it out. It's too big. It has too complicated of an OAuth integration. So walk through a little bit, at least, the work you went to get from, to evaluate it. Like, okay, you went and looked at the API, you realized it had an OpenAPI endpoint, great. But then you also realized that you couldn't just point to it. It wasn't, obviously it needs authentication. And on top of that, the authentication wasn't quite right. Plus you ran into an error in the API. So that, like, at the moment, this is still not something I'm going to be able to do, is it? Which is very disappointing. Like, it's not something I can go and do as a natural language programmer. It's only something, you guys can do as actual programmers.
Yeah, with Spotify, unfortunately, that's the case. I don't actually know for sure if the original OpenAPI definition was too big. The limit on the number of tools you can have at one time is 128. OpenAI will just return you an error if you try to offer it more than that. It might have been under that cap. I don't remember for sure, but sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, but you can limit without changing, because you can show, it's like if you want to expose just a couple services, you can just do it with a syntax of.
Yeah, like I could do search from Spotify.yaml and that'll just give it this one, or you can specify multiple.
Yeah, you can constrain your request to a set of APIs, not to the entire API, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, because you don't really like necessarily want to just give it the whole API. So that's why like the list tools is super nice, because you can see like just given the spec, here's the list of the various tools, and then you can just pick out the ones that you want to use. So because search probably isn't an actual.
No, it's one of them. It's right here.
That's
just
one of their
operations. Yeah.
So you can just pick out the ones, because as Grant said, there's a limit. You can only send 128, but even like you're wasting tokens, these cost tokens to send the definitions. So it's like, if you know you're not going to use it, then don't send it. It's just wasting money.
Yeah.
But the trickiest thing that Grant had to go through was the OAuth. And so like the problem with the OAuth is like fundamentally with OAuth, that's designed for like public internet services. Well, I mean, they're designed for services, things running on the web. So for us to we're looking to see if we can make the OAuth stuff a lot easier, but it does require us to run some like kind of public GPTScript services so that people can, we can act as a middleman or whatever. But I wanted to point out like one thing that you had said about like different models, which is really cool, is that, so like ChatGPT kind of like if you're building an assistant, you can go, or a custom GPT, there's a thing called actions, and you can copy and paste in your YAML. And so they do this already, but ChatGPT is a pretty advanced application that exists for OpenAI, but like there's not really something as robust as that for Gemini, for Anthropic, for any of the other large language, so it's like, even though ChatGPT has similar features, it's like this, you get the same functionality, but regardless of model. So it's like you can pick whatever model, the model might not be smart, very smart, but if you pick one of the big smart ones, then it will work on top of those.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question that the strength of GPTScript is for local LLM integration. I think that's part of it, but I do think a lot of it is also the ability to prompt engineer complex flows, because this is, the reality is it's not just calling one script, it's calling one script and probably writing this stuff to a database, then probably, pushing it out as a web front end to a web front end. It's more likely than not, this kind of API calling script is not going to be something you just run locally on your laptop to do searches. There's probably other ways to do that are just as easy. It's more likely that you'll be using this, at least my experience so far, is to power web services, right? To build web services that are LLM powered, or build apps, or do internal, functions for your organization that are powered by this. And they may be talking to an LLM, but I think it's just as likely they'll be talking to OpenAI or any other public LLM, not a private one.
It's like if you think about because the goal, like the big ambitious goal of GPTScript is try to figure out, it's like, can we actually write applications with just natural language? And so if you think about the vast majority of applications today, they're kind of like CRUD. They're just reading, manipulating data. And so it's like, well, that becomes like kind of like the obvious first thing for us is like, well, how do we integrate AI into data and services? And if we have efficient, easy access to data and services, then like, what can we do with it? Like, now it's like reading, writing, transforming data. So it's like just kind of this journey of trying to figure out.
It's on the tutorials page, Grant, that you're looking for.
There it is. Yeah, I was looking for this as an example of a really good, like, complex thing that one of our engineers did with GPTScript. Just to bring that up, since that's kind of what the question was addressing. So I would take a look at this blog post for an example of how you can really do like neat stuff by breaking down large problems into smaller bits and being able to do LLM things.
All right. So I think you know, the reaction I get when I see this thing is that, you know, inside of every large organization I've ever worked with or worked for, the integration of APIs is a nightmare. And you know, one of the things that would be, and certainly even for querying data, even for uncovering things, being able not just to do kind of traditional RAG, but be able to call APIs, pull from APIs, push to APIs. You know, hopefully the OpenAPI, you know, format is gaining a lot of prominence inside of organizations, because if I were a CIO right now, my one mandate would be, going forward, every single thing we build better, you know, use Swagger, have this OpenAPI approach, because I want the integration costs to come down. And the integration efforts to come down. And if these LLMs are going to be able to just understand them and immediately send calls back and forth and begin to, you know, basically obfuscate the complexity of API calls for business users, that's huge. I mean, just like enormously huge for people like me that don't, you know, that see an API and immediately get on Slack and ask somebody else to come figure out how to interface with it. So yeah, I'm super excited.
It's amazing because it's like AI is going to interact well with the most well-known like formats, because that's what it's kind of trained on. And so it's pretty cool when you think about it over the last decade or so. Is like kind of, and a lot of this is driven by open source. Is like there's been like this kind of almost like homogenization of like things going all kind of towards like the same things, where it's like certain databases, certain, you know, things like become the de facto standard. And there's a lot, you know, so it's like, so things like, because we had demo before, like SQLite. Like SQLite is such a ridiculously popular database where it's like AI knows it so well. So it's like there's been so much effort put into OpenAPI, and there's so much information about it out there that because of that, like AI knows it that structure very well. So it's like it's cool as the interfaces to systems become more commonplace. That just makes it even more efficient for AI to interact with them. So it's like we're kind of in like this well-positioned point in history where you know, we have all these systems, but they're relatively common patterns how to interact with them.
Yeah, how to launch a Docker container, how to talk to Kubernetes, how to talk to an API. You're 100%. All the time we've spent on standardization and effort, it actually may turn out to be incredibly useful when AI takes on a lot.
All these standards were not BS.
Those standards were not BS. Okay, so we see too. I know you wanted to show Google Maps, and that may be another. You know, I know that one you put together really fast, because I just mentioned it to you last night. What about Google Maps as an example? And you've got it now. So obviously, I think it was midnight your time when I said that. So what?
It was a bit earlier than that. It was maybe 10 o'clock.
Okay, so tell me about like the process. Maybe just tell me about, like, okay, I say to you Google Maps, and you then go and make it real. What's the process there? How did you develop the tool for Google Maps using, you know, this new OpenAPI support?
Yeah, so I just went searching for a Google Maps OpenAPI definition, and I found one on GitHub. And what's nice is I didn't have to modify it at all, because it has a reasonable number of tools in it and no errors in the way that it's defined. So if I download this real quick, we can just take a look at it. So I just took a look at this. There were instructions somewhere in here also about, this link here took me to the guide on how to get an API key. So I just kind of ran through that with my Google account and got a key. And then I looked at the, if I pull up the security schemes down here, with the API key auth that's defined, it's just one simple API key for the whole API. So every request is going to use that. There's documentation about how this works, but looking at this security scheme, I was able to know what environment variable I needed to set in order for GPTScript to be able to pick up that API key and then include it in every call. So I just set that and then started writing tools and pointing it directly to the definition on GitHub and asking it to do things, and it just worked. So much easier to set up. The only thing like difficult about this from someone who's not experienced with programming or with development perspective would be just finding the OpenAPI definition, because sometimes it's not all that easy to do. There's not, like, you go to the docs for a website, there's not going to be an obvious link to, oh, here's our whole YAML document for that. But anyway, yeah, this one was much easier to set up than Spotify. So I'll go ahead and run through a few examples. The first one is about my favorite coffee shop in my area. So reviews.gpt. So Google Maps has reviews on it, so you can get those reviews. You can find other things nearby. This is showing both of those. It's always fun to me to see the tool calls, because it's like, I didn't design this API, so I'm not familiar with it, but you kind of like learn about it yourself just from watching it do things. It's able to call place details, search for other things nearby. And then it's going to give us real reviews from real people on Google Maps. At least I assume these are real. I've not gone and verified that they're not hallucinated, but I've gotten this exact same response when I tried this earlier. So I'm pretty sure it's legit.
Have you tried any of the other ones? Holy Grounds in Dayton?
I've been to Ghostlight,
and
I've been to Press. So
right.
That's one example there. Another one, this one's interesting. You can ask it about elevation. And let's go ahead and do that.
Oh, that's
Kansas
interesting.
is flat,
What's the
but
difference
Kansas-
in
oh, sorry, go
elevation?
ahead.
So that if the math is simple enough, it'll be able to figure out the math. But
Yeah, since it's just subtraction, I believe it does it correctly. In fact, it'll probably tell me the values for both of them.
yeah, well, you have to treat it almost like mental math, where it's like, that's kind of what it's doing. It's like mental math, like not real math. So if you gave it a calculator, it would use it, and it would actually,
Yeah, yep, exactly.
There you
Yep.
go.
Kansas is flat, but it's slightly tilted. So as you drive across it, you actually go up in elevation quite a bit.
So I wanted to point out one thing about like the authentication. So like the way the authentication works is we're looking for special environment variables, because most of the services are looking for like a token. It's pretty much just like, it's like an OAuth token or something. It's looking for a token. And so we look at, what's the service name you're hitting, like the URL, and then we turn that into a special oh, that's funny. I like how you do that.
Yeah, that's just that I don't have to go open my browser and type and watch all the history pop up.
Yeah, so do we have docs on this already?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad you wrote docs.
So this whole authorization section here, or authentication rather section, explains what GPTScript does in order to look for environment variables and how those need to be named. So yeah, give this a read if you want to talk to a server that requires you to have a key, which is all of them.
Yeah, and Grant's working on now like a whole credential framework for GPTScript, so that will be, maybe next week we'll show that off.
So these are both discovery kind of API calls, but what about create post kind of API calls on this? I want to kind of get a map, get directions, or I want to create a I'm curious what kind of things you can post, because you're posting to your personal account here, right? Grant, this is sort of running against your Google account, or did you?
I assume so. Yeah, like I have a developer API key for Google Maps.
Okay.
So
you mean like you would say like add a review or upload an image or something like that?
I don't know. I
don't know. I was thinking more like create a road trip for me and point, kind of mark all the points on my, create a saved map that I can pull back up that has, I'm driving from San Francisco to Arizona and I want to hit, the 4 best coffee shops on my route, right? Like that kind of, build me an itinerary, or go back to, we were talking about this last night. Like, okay, I've got the travel agent app that sort of makes me an itinerary around the UK for my week in the UK. What, now daily, I want you to create maps for me, right? If I have this endpoint, I can make, I can start handing this tool to other systems and get outputs that are valuable for me if I'm building an app that, provides, because so many of the generative use cases are kind of building agents who are good at doing the same thing, and then deliver effectively a package of information or an output to a user. And so, can I do things like that? Can I generate, maps? Can I generate directions? Can I sort of create these things and then share them as links? Again, it's probably more about the APIs that are available in Google Maps, but I'm just curious, how that works. Or do you envision that most people will, again, like I'm building an app to create a road trip plan, right? I want both Spotify and Google. I want you to map my directions. I want you to find the best coffee shops, and I want you to make me a playlist on my Spotify. I have to pass into you at some point my Google and my Spotify account. So maybe that's where your OAuth service that you're talking about comes into play. But it feels like, we're 60% of the way towards being able to create that kind of experience where, I can tell you about me, and I can tell you about where I'm going, and you can build me a really cool plan of things to see and music to listen to and coffee to drink.
Yep. Yeah. We basically, through this OpenAPI integration, we basically have the building blocks that would build the base of that. But then we'd have to define more GPTScript tools to have like the playlist writer who gets access to Spotify, and then the coffee shop finder, and something to figure out neat tourist destinations and things like that to put it all together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm saying like that's where it feels like we're at. Like it feels like we've now got the building blocks. And if I put an engineer on this for a week or two, I'd probably come back with something that would start to look pretty good towards being able to interact with the user. But the fact that, like, it still seems to me that a big challenge is, okay, I built that thing and now I want it to work for everybody. Darren's Google account and Spotify account are different than my Google and Spotify account. And so I'm going to need some way to be able to say, oh, hello, user, I've ID'd you through your Google ID and your Spotify account, and you've done a little OAuth stuff. Now go create a bunch of things for me. If I'm going to push these agents out, right? If I'm AAA and I want to have a road trip planning app, that's kind of leverages their data that's all in their AAA guidebooks and connects to Spotify, and you have Apple Music, click here to add Apple Music, right? Like, you can envision a world where I'm passing a lot of credentials over at times, even if I'm just using these kind of scripts as a user.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously, like one of the biggest challenges right now is authentication. It's like just basically managing authentication and whatnot. But most of these services are designed for like service to service integration. So they kind of have a lot of that. Like the authentication that you're setting up is like for these type of services is not the authentication of the end user, it's the authentication of the service. So it's like, it's not actually that difficult if you wanted to like run one of these and host it, but because like the capabilities are again, like just based off of like what they expect, other services to be doing or whatever. So, it does actually align pretty well, but like the only the difficult thing right now is really just setting up authentication.
It would definitely be cool. Like, I mean, as time goes on, right, you can totally envision having, my own local studio to kind of manage these scripts and run these scripts where, someone creates a really cool road trip script and I just download it, auth in, and generate and get a bunch of outputs, right, where I can uncover and find this. And that kind of brings me to a question I had earlier, which was when you're added a bunch of new tools here, right? This Spotify tool and this Google Maps tool. Can I find these tools that you've created? Are they automatically? We talked last week or 2 weeks ago about the tools.gptscript website. Are these tools going to start showing up in there? Are they already there? Like, how do these tools that are pointing to OpenAPI, does everybody have to go do this themselves? Or once one's created, can I just use your Google Maps tool? And can I use your Spotify tool?
Yeah, well, I didn't really like create anything here. And that's kind of the beauty of it is that I didn't have to write a tool. So none of this is on the tools.gptscript.ai site yet. we might be able to add something to it that's like, hey, these are OpenAPI definitions for real applications that we've tried and that work. That could be kind of cool to have like a curated set of those. But yeah, I mean, there isn't a tool to build in this case. It's just figuring out the authentication, getting your document, and then hooking it all up like this.
I think if we're going to give people that are not engineers access to these tools, you're going to need to turn them into just, one step easier, right? Because if I have to go out and find an API definition in YAML, and I've got to try and pull it in and then figure out how to get API keys, and I've got to figure out how to hook all this in, I think you're still talking about a bar that is not business user. It is still developer / programmer / DevOps person that's comfortable sort of working in CLI, working in GitHub, and finding these different APIs and understanding them. So finding a way for these services to pop up and be accessible on the tool service would be a really nice next step.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Well, I think that's everything you wanted to show.
Yep.
Grant. Darren, did you have any more questions for Grant that you wanted to hit on this? Anything else to cover?
No.
Awesome.
About it.
Well, Grant, thank you so much for coming today and showing off this new feature. I really appreciate it. There's a blog up already that demonstrates. The docs are up, so you can find all of that on acorn.com. If you haven't already, visit gptscript.ai and check out the GitHub repo. You can find tons of examples of scripts. Give us a star, follow the YouTube channel for our regular community updates, and we'll hopefully see you, if not next week, the week after. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Friday.